Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back. So today I wanted to give my review of The Power of the Dog, starring Benedict Cumberbatch. So this one kind of crept up on me a little bit. I had heard word about it for a little while. I hadn't followed it too closely, but I know it'd been getting quite a few. I think, nominations, and a lot of people were talking about it. It was getting a lot of praise, so if I had the chance to sit down and watch it, I actually watched it twice, and so wanted to take some time to kind of give my thoughts on this movie. So first and foremost, directed by Jane Campion, also written and produced by Jane Campion as well. Starring Benedict Cumberbatch, Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, and Cody Mcphee. Originally released at the 78th Venice International Film Festival on September 2nd, 2021. The film also had special screenings at the 2021 Toronto International Film Festival and the Telluride Film Festivals in that same month, I believe. The movie released worldwide on Netflix on January 27th, 2022. And yeah, so that's, I guess, the reason why this one kind of snuck up on me is that it's only been out for about a month now when this podcast is released, almost a month to the day practically. But yeah, I mean, I hadn't really heard very much about it from my friends who had watched it or who watched Netflix. None of them had really talked about this movie very much, but I kept seeing a lot of buzz for it online, as well as a lot of Oscar buzz for this as well. But yeah, the music by Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead. Looked it up. He also did the soundtrack for the movie There Will Be Blood, as well as the Master film. So, which, listening to the soundtrack on this, I kind of get it. The music definitely sounds similar to the soundtrack from those movies. I never actually saw The Master, but I have seen There Will Be Blood, and I definitely see a lot of parallels between the soundtrack for that film and this one. So basically, I am going to go over the plot and the themes of the movie in pretty heavy detail. So as always, this is your spoiler warning. If you haven't seen it yet, I do recommend going in blind. I think the movie will have a much bigger impact on you if you don't know very much about it going into it. So consider this your warning. So this is based on the 1967 novel by Thomas Savage, also called The Power of the Dog. The story follows this two wealthy brothers and who are also ranchers, George and Phil Burbank, played by Jesse Plemons and Benedict Cumberbatch, respectively. While on a cattle drive, the two stay at a local inn owned by a widow named Rose Gordon, played by Kirsten Dunst, and her son Peter, played by Cody Mcphee. George is the more kind-hearted of the two brothers and is immediately attracted to Rose, which, just kind of a side note, Plemons and Dunst are engaged in real life. So you can kind of see some of the chemistry there between them on film. However, Phil, played by Cumberbatch, is the more volatile and ill-tempered of the two brothers. While they're having dinner at the inn, he proceeds to mock Rose's son Peter for his lisp and apparent effeminate behavior. Makes fun of some paper flower decorations that Peter makes. Which leads to some pretty awkward confrontation there. Eventually, George and Rose are married, and Rose and Peter eventually move in to live with George, who basically lives at a big ranch with his brother Phil, much to the ire of Phil. And this leads to further aggression and confrontations from him. Things start to come to a head, though, when Phil develops an unexpected relationship with Peter, much to Rose's chagrin. That's all I'm going to really say about the plot. I do think a lot of this, like I said before, it's best to kind of go into this blind. That being said, I am going to kind of discuss some of the greater details of the story that happened there. But basically, to kind of, without giving too much away, it's revealed later in the movie that the mentor of George and Phil, who they call Bronco Henry, had a very strong impact on Phil, and so much so that he talks about him constantly throughout the film. There's a moment in the movie where Peter catches Phil in a rather interesting scene. I'll just leave it at that. Nothing super provocative or anything like that, but definitely a scene that, when it happens, it's like, oh no. But basically it leads to it leads to a rather unexpected relationship blossoming between these two, which was very unexpected, where Phil actually starts to treat Peter with a little bit more kindness, and even goes so far as to trying to make a rope for him. But of course, he still proceeds to torture Peter's mother, Rose, and this basically leads her into alcoholism to try to cope with the constant stress and the influence that Phil has over her life. And so some of the themes in this movie that play out is, one, of course, is that people talk about with this is the toxic masculinity. Just the idea that Phil, he carries himself in the movie with this grand sense of bravado. He's very cruel to a lot of other people. His brother George, who he consistently calls fatso throughout the movie, but his main form of torture is towards Rose and Peter. Rose he kind of torments almost seemingly off camera in many instances throughout the film, kind of showing his influence throughout the movie, which kind of ties into the title of the movie, which I'll kind of get into here in a little bit. And then he's also pretty cruel to Peter, despite, as it's revealed later on, having quite a few similarities to Peter on many levels. Another major theme of the movie is the psychological power and influence of Phil. And so kind of what I was saying before, this kind of goes along with the title of the movie, The Power of the Dog, which is a biblical reference, which is basically, let me see, I thought I had that written here. Oh yeah, sorry, I had it written here, I just couldn't find it real quick. So it's the biblical verse is, "Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog." So basically the idea is that Phil is the dog, and his influence is what is that power. It's the unspoken influence that he has over the ranch, because it's clear that Phil runs things in the movie. Like his character, Benedict Cumberbatch, his character, he's the guy that kind of runs everything, and he's kind of in charge of everybody. And it's clear from the very first scene between him and Jesse Plemons' character that even though they're brothers and they're technically, I believe, co-owners of the ranch, it's clear that George has no backbone and doesn't stand up to his brother at all, and Phil definitely runs things. And he speaks to his brother in a very cruel and malicious kind of way. The thing about his character, though, is Phil's not directly confrontational with people. Rather, it's sort of an underlying tone in his voice. It's the suggestion of repercussions, even though he never actually shows anything like that. There's never any physical altercation between him or anybody else in the movie. But it's just that sense of foreboding that he has with his character, which kind of goes along again with the title, The Power of the Dog. Just his ever-present influence and control and power over the ranch. So just a few pros, or just a few things that I kind of want to point out in this movie that really kind of stood out to me. Number one, of course, is just the acting. I love the acting in this. Of course, the stand-up performances, you have basically the four main characters in the movie, and that's Cumberbatch, Plemons, Dunst, and Mcphee. And honestly, three of them, Dunst, Mcphee, and Cumberbatch, are phenomenal. Like, Kirsten Dunst delivers a desperate frailty to her character as she slips further and further into alcoholism. You really do feel sorry for her throughout the course of the story, because she starts as being a single mother, just trying to make ends meet as the owner of the inn, and just even when she marries George and moves into her ranch, immediately Phil is disrespectful to her. There's a scene where she calls him Brother Phil, and he immediately, shoots her down and says, "I'm not your brother. You're nothing," basically calls her nothing but a schemer. So it's like from the first instant they meet, it's clear that he hates her, and this, of course, drives her into alcoholism, and in many ways, she kind of returns a lot of that same disrespect to Phil, although you could argue that it is pretty deserved. But yeah, her performance is just, it's painful to watch, but it's so great, though. Just like you see her kind of hiding the bottles of bourbon from like her husband and from her son throughout the movie. She's constantly getting sick and having headaches because of how much she's drinking, just trying to cope with her life. It's in a lot of ways, it's almost kind of like she's a prisoner in a sense. Like, she's in this big house, and you do get the sense that she and George do really care about each other, but because of Phil's continuous influence over everybody there, she can never seem to escape from him. And it's ironic too that that there's a biblical verse that's actually quoted, the verse that I read before. Peter actually reads it out of the Bible later in the movie. It's actually pretty fitting that it's quoted because in a lot of ways, Phil kind of acts as sort of like the god of the ranch. There's several scenes where he's actually standing over Rose's character. There's a scene where she's trying to learn to play the piano and to play a song for a dinner party that George wants to have. And then Phil is standing at the top of the stairs with his banjo, basically playing the same song kind of in a mocking way to make her uncomfortable and to lose concentration and basically just to fuck with her. Again, showing just how much of a sadistic prick that he is. And there's another scene too where he keeps whistling the same song later in the movie when he catches Rose outside in the outside the house. He stands above her in a window and he whistles that tune towards her. And it's like, and you can tell just from the look on her face that she's super uncomfortable because she knows that he's there, and she realizes that he's probably watching her from somewhere, but she doesn't know from where exactly. And again, tying into the theme of the movie and the title, it's that ever-looming presence and influence that he has over her, the power of the dog, as they say. And then, of course, the next performance that's, is fantastic is Cody Mcphee, who, if I remember correctly, I think he was in was it the Rise of the Planet of the Apes? I believe he was in there. I believe he plays the son in that movie. But the one that befriends the orangutan. At least it looks like him. I could be wrong. But yeah, Mcphee as Peter Gordon, his performance, again, and this is why I'm glad I watched the movie twice, because I feel like I kind of wrote him off as kind of a nothing character the first time I watched it. But watching it again, there's a lot of nuances to his character that I didn't catch the first time. It's like, yes, he comes off as a seemingly meek and feeble character, but he later in the story shows a much darker grit to him that can be very easy to overlook at certain points. So like an example is his character, even though he shows a lot of artistic value, again, he makes flowers, decorations out of paper, which Phil kind of mocks in the beginning of the movie. But it also is revealed that he is going to school to study medicine. And there's a scene in the movie later where he catches a rabbit and he brings it into the house. And when one of the house servants is going up there to bring a carrot up there for it to eat, it's revealed that he's killed the rabbit and has actually dissected it because, as he states in the movie, he needs to learn how to basically dissect things if he's going to be performing surgery. He needs to learn how to do things like that. But the way he does it with such there's such a lack of emotion or empathy from his character when he does it. And it's like, but you can definitely tell underneath the surface, there's definitely like a volcano of emotions underneath him, but it's like his character is like this very calculating person that I think Mcphee delivers very well throughout the entire movie. You never feel like he's helpless. He does a good job of... There's definitely scenes where you feel sorry for him because he's clearly getting picked on and he's clearly the victim of much of Phil's torture. But I never got the sense that he was helpless. It always seemed like there was something going on underneath the surface, something that he was planning or scheming. And there's kind of a dark reveal with him later in the movie that I'll get into, in a moment. But his performance, of course, yeah, that was fantastic. But, of course, the stand-up performance is definitely Benedict Cumberbatch as Phil Burbank. He is just absolutely fantastic as the borderline sadistic Phil Burbank. Every scene Cumberbatch is in just carries a sense of dread and discomfort whenever we see him. Like, whenever he is on camera, we're as uncomfortable as Rose. It's almost like that power that he has extends beyond the movie and even to the audience that's watching the film. Like, every time he's in a scene, you can just see the look of just pure terror on Dunst's face as she just, she looks on with pure dread, just wondering, like, what is he going to say to torment her further? And then we, the audience, are sitting there thinking the exact same thing. I remember the first time I watched it thinking, there's a scene in the movie where George tries to force Rose to play the piano for a dinner party that they're having, and she keeps practicing for it, but she doesn't actually end up playing the song. And then Phil walks into the room and essentially mocks her for not playing the song and even makes note that she had tried to practice it for so long. And just the look on Dunst's face when she watches him as he's saying this, she doesn't say a single word. And he doesn't really openly insult her, but he delivers his comment in a way that it's absolutely a jab at her, and she knows it, and he does it in front of these people, and it's like she's like a prisoner who has to continuously be tortured by this man, and she has to deal with it, and there's nothing she can do about it, because of course her husband, won't stand up to him because he's, in a sense, I at least in my opinion, I think that George is scared of his older brother Phil, so every scene that he's in, it's just this sense of dread. And even watching the movie the second time, I still feel that sense of just, that sense of foreboding whenever his character is in the scene. So Cumberbatch he's fantastic in this movie. I loved him in this. Yeah, he's great. And of course, another kind of a big theme of this movie is that, it's implied that Phil's character, he talks about the character of Bronco Henry, and how much of an impact Henry had on him, how he taught him to ride, and how, and Phil states, I think at least several points throughout the movie, that Henry was one of the best riders he'd ever seen. And of course, it's revealed later in the movie that the two had, more than just a mutual respect for one another. It was implied that they had a, somewhat physical relationship with one another. Because there's a scene in the movie where there's really two big scenes where it kind of implies this. And again, not to give those away too much, because I think that's better if you see them and experience them for yourself. But there's a scene roughly about halfway through the movie. This is right around the time when Peter and Phil start to develop a relationship with one another, or at least a friendship, I should say. But this is the part where it's kind of revealed that Bronco Henry meant more to Phil than just being a mentor. And this is where the film kind of takes an interesting turn. Peter catches Phil in a rather interesting position while they're outside. And then at that point, you think that Phil is going to start making Peter's life a living hell, but rather later he actually warms up to Peter and actually wants to make a rope for him and try to, at least it seems, make some kind of amends with him. And so the movie takes a very interesting turn at that point, where it almost kind of seems like we're going to see a softer side of Phil, like maybe perhaps a more caring, kinder side. But of course, there's another big confrontation between him and Rose, where she ends up giving a lot of his rawhides away, which, pisses him off, tremendously. And then there's, of course, Peter, basically, he offers to give Phil a cowhide that he had gotten. And this is where, to kind of go back to my point about Peter's character, this is where we see a lot of the darkness to his character that comes out. Because again, it's stated in the movie that he is studying medicine. And we see him, dissect a rabbit at one point. And then also, there's a scene later in the movie where when he and Phil, it's just the two of them going on kind of a ride, and they catch a rabbit, and its leg is injured, and Phil tells Peter that, he needs to put it out of his misery. And we, as the audience, are kind of expecting Peter to be very reluctant to do that, because up until this point, he seems very timid and shy and, adverse to any kind of physical violence. But instead, he just kills it immediately, without a second thought. It surprises us, and it seems like it even surprises Phil. And again, this kind of reveals a toughness to his character that I think maybe we didn't quite see the first time. We, the audience, missed it, and even Phil misses it as well. But there is eventually Phil's character does come down with a very bad illness. He becomes incredibly sick later in the movie, and it's revealed that Peter had a direct hand in that. No pun intended. If you see the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. Again, I don't want to go into that too much because it really kind of falls onto, or it really kind of goes into the message of the movie as well as the title. So I think it's one of those things where you need to kind of see it, and it'll make more sense, and it'll have a bigger impact on you. But just essentially without going into it too much, it definitely seems like Peter is a much more dark and calculating character than we originally gave him credit for. So as far as performances go, I did give those 3 props. The only one that I'm going to say I don't think is Jesse Plemons. Like, I don't want to be mean here. I don't think he's a particularly great actor. I think he's okay. He was in Breaking Bad as well as the El Camino movie with Aaron Paul. I just feel like he's just kind of the same guy. It almost doesn't seem like he's really acting. It almost just kind of seems like he's just saying his lines. Like, I feel like he's just kind of delivering his lines, and I don't know, like, he doesn't even really emote in this movie. I will say, in this role, I feel like he fits, because he's supposed to be a character who doesn't really have much of a backbone, who doesn't really want to stand up to his brother, and doesn't like confrontation. So in this sense, I would say that having him in this role probably works. But I've seen him in this, I've seen him in Breaking Bad, I've seen him in El Camino, and I don't know if he's a good actor or not. This coming from me, who's not an actor at all and has had, virtually no experience with acting. But yeah, I would say, in my opinion, he kind of feels like one of the weaker aspects of the movie. I guess him being engaged to Dunst in real life does give it does give the couple kind of chemistry on the film that I think works, and it seems believable. But yeah, I mean, it just kind of feels like his character, there's not much to his character. And I don't know if that's because of, maybe that's how he was just written, or if that's just because of Plemons' acting. It's hard to say. But yeah, that's just kind of my take on that. I don't think he's been in a whole lot either. So maybe as time goes on and he's in more projects, maybe we'll get to see more out of him. I'm not sure, but that's kind of just my 2 cents right now. I don't really have a whole lot of negatives to say about this movie without nitpicking. I know this movie has gotten several nominations. I don't know if it's won any awards though. But yeah, like I would definitely highly recommend this one. My last episode, I did a review of Don't Look Up, and how, despite it getting quite a bit of praise, I just kind of thought it was okay. This movie, I definitely really enjoyed. I definitely, like, I watched it twice, and I might even go back and watch it a third time. And to be honest, I kind of want to go and read the book now as well. This was definitely, I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. These kinds of movies, not to say that I don't like them. I liked There Will Be Blood. I didn't love it. I thought it was fine. Really, with the exception of Daniel Day-Lewis's acting, I mean, I didn't think a whole lot of the movie. Apologies if you're a huge fan of it. But yeah, this movie I really enjoyed. Watching it again, I think I even enjoyed it more than the first time. That's one recommendation I think I would give you watching this movie, is that watch it once, and if it doesn't feel like it lands, I would say give it a little bit of time and then watch it again. Watch it at least twice, and I think you'll really appreciate it the second time. Let's see. Wow, this movie has a lot of accolades. Let's see. Overall, it's had 265 nominations and 210 wins. Okay, let's see. Won an award from the American Film Institute Awards. Any big ones? Let's see. Trying to see if there's any big ones. The Toronto International Film Festival, the Venice Film Festival. Yeah, quite a few. Man, it's won 3 Golden Globes as well. I just want to see which ones it won. If it'll say. I can't find the breakdown here, but let's see. Okay. Well, I'm not going to go into that too much. But yeah, that's great. Yeah, I would definitely recommend checking this movie out for sure. I greatly enjoyed it. It definitely has my seal of approval for sure. The only thing I would say about this movie, though, is that it is definitely a slower film. It's more. I like in this movie, it's definitely similar to movies like The Master or There Will Be Blood, where there's not a lot of action, there's mostly talking, but it's the scenes with talking that are definitely the most powerful scenes. And then, again, just the performances from the actors and actress, I think those really kind of are what drive this movie home. There's just I love the cinematography of this movie too, which I didn't look up who did that, but just the sweeping landscapes that you see are just, it's great. One of my favorite scenes is there's a scene where Cumberbatch, where his character cuts his hand, and you see kind of the blood get on the grass, and just like that shot where you see that juxtaposition of like the red liquid on the golden grass as it sways in the wind. It's like, I love that shot. There's a lot of great sweeping shots in this movie. Like there's another great shot where it's where Cumberbatch's character is looking out over these hills because he keeps saying that he sees something in those hills that nobody else can see. And then, of course, I didn't see it either. And then later, Peter's character shows up and says that he sees like a dog barking or like a wolf. And when you kind of look at it, you can kind of see it later. But it's like just that shot of like the hills overhead when you can see that's another shot in the movie that I really enjoy. And just kind of the grittiness of this movie too. There's a scene later on in the movie where George wants to have Phil in for dinner, and basically he tells Phil that, he needs to wash up, and Phil basically refuses to do it. And it's like throughout the entire movie, he kind of has like this, like Cumberbatch's character has like this griminess to his character, like where he always just looks like he's dirty. Like his hair is always greasy and slicked back. He always just looks like he just came out of like a dirt pit or something. Like he always looks just filthy, especially when compared to Plemons' character, who always looks so clean cut and dressed up. And I love the different the contrast between those two characters, and then how George is always very quiet and and really doesn't say much, whereas Phil is very outspoken and even abrasive towards other people, and just in general not afraid to speak his mind, even if it's offensive to others. This was. I feel like as I'm getting older, I'm developing more of a taste for these kinds of films, where I don't mind that they're slower. And this is a slower movie. That's another thing I would say about this is that it's 2 hours, but I would say it flows pretty well. That was a criticism I had about about Don't Look Up, was that it was 2.5 hours long, and it kind of felt like it. It felt like it dragged in a few scenes. But this was one of those. But Power of the Dog, it's just over 2 hours, and I feel like it flows pretty well. I can't think of too many times watching this where I was kind of squirming in my seat and checking my phone to see what time it was, or checking the bar on Netflix to see how much of the movie was left. It kept me engaged throughout the entire story, and I was genuinely interested to see where it was going and how it would end. And again, not to give the ending away, but when you watch it, again, I think if you watch it twice, you'll really kind of get it, but like it definitely reveals that there's a lot of dark elements in this movie, some of which you may not have noticed or expected when you were first watching it. But yeah, and then I think just another thing about this movie that really kind of stuck out to me was, and this is kind of another theme, is just the influence a person can have. How somebody who, even when they're not on frame, they still have this power over other people. Phil's character, even in scenes where he's not technically on camera, the other characters can kind of sense his presence. And I think that's a good attribute to have for an antagonistic character like Phil. Again, we never see him really do anything physical. He never really reacts violently towards anybody in the movie. Mostly he just gets in people's faces and yells at them or just insults them. But there's never really a moment where he gets into a physical altercation with somebody, and yet for some reason his threat is never diminished as a result. And I think that definitely is a testament to both the writing and also the acting of Cumberbatch. This is a genuinely threatening character who you really can't like him. Even in scenes where it almost kind of seems like he's going to redeem himself, you really can't like this character. But to be honest, I kind of like that. I think it fits him perfectly. And then, this, like I said, this has a high recommendation for me. I definitely think if you like slower, well-written movies with some fantastic dialogue, I think this is definitely going to stick the landing for you. If you're not, I would still say give it a try and see if it resonates. I feel like there's definitely something here. If for nothing else, I think the acting is definitely top-notch. So. I think that's probably going to about do it for my review of this movie. Hopefully I've convinced you. If you haven't seen it yet and you were kind of on the fence, definitely check this out. I think this definitely deserves the praise that it's getting, and it certainly deserves a view. So give it a try, and if you like it, feel free to, comment on YouTube and let me know what you thought of it. Well, guys, once again, I am on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. I may start to try to expand into other podcast platforms, depending on how things go with the show. But once again, if you like what you heard, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Later.